The moment we stepped into the restaurant, I felt it, the subtle tension lingering in the air, thick and suffocating, like smoke that refuses to leave a room. The low hum of conversations and clinking glasses couldn't drown out the unease coiling in my stomach. Olivia walked beside me, her hand brushing mine occasionally, a fragile attempt at reassurance. But I could see it in her eyes, an undercurrent of fear that had nothing to do with the crowded space or the muted jazz playing in the background. It had to do with Robert. Robert had that look I had learned to recognize over the years, a practiced charm masking simmering contempt. Tonight, though, it seemed more volatile, more dangerous, like a storm barely held in check. His father, Gerald, sat across the table, that familiar smug grin plastered on his face, eyes flicking between Olivia and me with that subtle, patronizing approval that always made my skin crawl. As dinner progressed, Robert began his usual parade of small, cruel jabs disguised as jokes. A mocking comment about Olivia's work, a sarcastic chuckle, an exaggerated sigh at her words. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands clenching under the table. Olivia tried to laugh, to hide her discomfort, but her voice trembled. Every glance exchanged with Robert was a silent warning I could not ignore. And then it happened. The world seemed to tilt sideways for a single heartbeat. Robert's hand shot out, gripping Olivia's hair with a brutal, possessive force. She gasped, twisting to pull away, but he held her fast. The restaurant fell into a sudden, deafening silence around us, and yet, Gerald's voice cut through it like a knife. "Good boy." I froze. My mind raced, disbelief warring with anger. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with shame, fear, and a sickening sense of inevitability. Everyone else, family, strangers, waiters, looked away, unsure where to place their gaze, as if this act of violence had become invisible in their polite shock. But I could see it all. The small bruises beginning to blossom along Olivia's scalp, the tears pooling in her eyes, the rigid tension in her shoulders. My heart clenched, and I felt a fire ignite inside me, scorching fear into fury. I wanted to scream, to lunge across the table, to tear him away from her. But I hesitated because I realized something darker. Olivia was afraid, terrified, and I had to be the one to break through, the one to act. The question that burned through me, sharp and urgent, was this: how long had this been going on, hidden behind smiles, polite dinners, and whispered excuses? Before I could form another thought, Robert leaned back, a cruel smirk twisting his lips, oblivious to, or perhaps relishing, the storm he had ignited. Olivia's fingers trembled, brushing her hair from her face, and I noticed a faint red mark at her temple. That mark, small but undeniable, confirmed my deepest fear. This was no isolated incident. And in that instant, I knew one terrifying truth. What had begun as humiliation in a crowded restaurant was only the first chapter of a nightmare I was about to confront. And the next move would change everything that I had always prided myself on knowing my daughter, on reading the subtle shifts in her expressions that spoke louder than words. Olivia had grown up bright and fearless, a girl whose laughter could fill a room and whose ambition seemed limitless. But marriage had changed something small at first, almost imperceptible, but steadily corrosive. Robert, the man she had once adored, had slipped into a role I could barely recognize. Charming on the surface, controlling beneath, with a patience honed to manipulate and intimidate. Our family gatherings had always been tense. Gerald, his father, radiated authority in a way that made the air thick, suffocating. He never raised his voice, but his eyes carried a weight that silenced dissent. Martha, his mother, was a shadow, hovering behind him, nodding quietly at everything, her soft smiles masking fear or complicity. Together, they formed a silent wall of approval for Robert's darker impulses. I thought I could shield Olivia from them, from the subtle judgments, the whispered criticisms, the way her successes were diminished or twisted into mockery. But Robert's cruelty had begun to creep in quietly, insidiously, snide remarks at dinners, private critiques disguised as advice, moments of isolation disguised as concern. Each incident left invisible scars, leaving Olivia hesitant, cautious, always second-guessing herself. That night, walking into the warm amber glow of the restaurant, I couldn't shake the memory of the tiny hints I had noticed over the past months. The unexplained bruises she dismissed with nervous laughter. The hurried texts she deleted before I could see them. The way she flinched when Robert raised his voice, even slightly. Every detail replayed in my mind, a puzzle I had been assembling silently, and every piece confirmed the truth I had dreaded. Olivia was trapped in a life that was slowly consuming her. As we approached the table, I felt my pulse quicken, not only from fear but from the urgent, desperate need to protect her. My hand brushed hers, and she squeezed back. A small, fleeting connection, but one that told me she still trusted me, still needed me. The air between us crackled with unspoken tension, and I realized that my role was no longer just that of a mother offering comfort. I would have to be a shield, a witness, a force strong enough to challenge not just Robert, but his entire family system built on intimidation and fear. And as Robert's dark gaze met mine across the table, I understood something terrifying. He knew I suspected him. That look, half amusement, half menace, was a warning. The question burned in my mind like fire. How far would he go to maintain control, and how much longer could Olivia survive in silence? The weeks after that night were a delicate, terrifying dance. Robert wore his charm like armor, smiling at friends and family, laughing when Olivia hesitated or stumbled over words. But behind the carefully crafted mask, I could see the storm building, a storm that threatened to consume my daughter entirely. Every visit to their apartment became a test of nerves. Olivia would greet me with a forced smile, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee, careful not to provoke him. The tension in the air was tangible, electric, like a wire straining under too much current. I tried to speak softly to her, to coax her fears into words, but she'd shake her head, whispering, "It's nothing, Mom. I can handle it." I knew better. I could see the marks hidden under her sleeves, subtle bruises along her wrists, tiny red lines along her hairline. My heart ached, and a knot of fury grew inside me. A fury I buried under calm reassurances, all while silently documenting every sign of abuse. I snapped photos when she wasn't looking, recorded snippets of his angry voice when he thought he was alone. Each small piece of evidence was a lifeline we might need, though the thought of confrontation made my stomach twist. And Robert escalated. The humiliation at family gatherings became sharper, more public. At a cousin's birthday party, he mocked Olivia's promotion in front of friends, calling her ambitious in all the wrong ways, while Gerald laughed quietly, approvingly, as if cruelty were a shared joke. I watched my daughter's smile falter, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and I realized this wasn't just emotional abuse anymore. It was war, a slow, relentless siege designed to break her confidence, her spirit. Then came the first twist. I discovered that Robert had secretly siphoned money from Olivia's savings account, pretending it was a bank error. Financial control, I realized, was another layer of his power over her. The betrayal cut deeper than any bruise or insult because it was invisible, insidious, and utterly calculated. One night, I overheard a phone call he left accidentally on speaker. The words made my blood run cold. "She won't do anything without me. I control everything now." Olivia, sitting silently in the next room, hadn't heard him, but I had. And in that moment, I understood the terrifying depth of his manipulation. I knew then that waiting, hoping, or reasoning would do no good. Action was inevitable. But before I could plan the next move, an unthinkable moment occurred, a subtle but chilling warning that would change everything. Robert cornered Olivia in the hallway, his hand gripping her arm, his face inches from hers, and muttered a threat so cold and precise it made my blood freeze. And as I stood outside the door, heart pounding, I realized something terrifying. The nightmare was escalating, and the next incident could change everything forever. The day of confrontation arrived with a quiet intensity that made the air feel almost suffocating. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering every scrap of evidence I could. Photos of bruises, hidden voice recordings, text messages dripping with threats. Each piece was a testament to the nightmare Olivia had endured, and each weighed heavily on my heart. I could feel my pulse hammering, not with fear, but with a desperate determination. This was it. There could be no turning back. We arrived at the family meeting, a carefully staged gathering under the guise of reconciliation. Robert's smug grin did not falter. He leaned back in his chair, confident that none of us had proof. Gerald sat nearby, a silent observer, Martha's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Olivia sat beside me, trembling but resolute, her fingers clutching mine like an anchor in a storm. I began with calm words, each sentence deliberate, each gesture measured. Then I laid the evidence bare. The photos of bruises, the recordings of his chilling threats, the messages detailing financial control. Each one a dagger slicing through Robert's carefully constructed facade. The room went silent. Twist 1. Gerald, who had always seemed untouchable, suddenly revealed something that made my stomach drop. He pulled out a journal hidden from everyone, chronicling Robert's escalating cruelty. proof that even his father had noticed and recorded Robert's violence, yet remained silent until now. The shock was palpable. Robert's smirk faltered, a flicker of panic crossing his eyes. "You've all been keeping secrets," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "But we have the truth now, and nothing can hide it." Robert's denial was frantic, wild, almost unhinged. He shouted, he lunged, but the evidence was undeniable. His threats, his manipulation, his abuse, every act exposed. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, a reflection of the terror he had forced onto Olivia for years. Then came the final chilling moment that would haunt us forever. He turned toward Olivia, a mix of anger and desperation twisting his features, and whispered, "You'll regret this." For a heartbeat, I felt the weight of helplessness, imagining the dangers still lurking if we faltered. But Olivia's grip on my hand tightened, a silent promise that she would no longer be silent, no longer controlled. And in that instant, I realized the truth I had been fighting for. Exposing the darkness was only the beginning. What came next, justice, consequences, and the long road to healing, would test all of us in ways we could never have predicted. The room held its breath, the tension crackling like a live wire, and I knew the final act was about to unfold. One that would either shatter our family completely or set us free. The courtroom was stark, sterile, and suffused with an unbearable tension that pressed down on us like a weight. Olivia sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her jaw set with a mixture of exhaustion and newfound determination. The months of planning, documenting, and surviving had led to this moment. The moment where truth would no longer be negotiable, where lies and threats could no longer shield Robert from justice. Robert entered, his presence still commanding, but stripped of the mask that once made him untouchable. I caught the flicker of fear in his eyes, the subtle twitch of his jaw, as the evidence was presented one piece at a time. Photos of bruises, recordings of threats, testimony from witnesses, all meticulously laid bare. Each revelation tightened the knot of dread in my stomach, but also ignited a sense of justice, raw and exhilarating. Twist 1. Gerald, who had once encouraged cruelty with that approving smirk, sat silently, unable to meet our eyes. The journal he had kept, documenting Robert's escalating violence, became the turning point. Even he could no longer deny the truth. His quiet, stunned submission was a testament to the power of evidence, and to the courage it takes to confront the sins we've ignored. When the verdict came, 8 years, I felt a wave of relief so overwhelming it left me trembling. Olivia exhaled, a sound that seemed to carry away years of fear and pain. She would finally be free. Matthew, her young son, hugged her tight, unaware of the full weight of what had happened, yet sensing the shift in the air, the lifting of a darkness that had shadowed their lives for far too long. In the weeks that followed, Olivia rebuilt her life like a phoenix rising from ashes. She returned to architecture, designing spaces that mirrored her strength and resilience. We laughed again at family dinners, though always cautiously, aware of the fragility of peace. Yet the final twist lingered like a shadow. Gerald, now quiet and reflective, admitted to me in private that his silence had been a choice fueled by fear. Fear of Robert's wrath, fear of facing uncomfortable truths. That confession, bitter and humbling, was a reminder that cruelty often thrives not just in action, but in inaction. As I watched Olivia walk through the park with Matthew, her head held high, her laughter bright and free, I realized the most profound lesson of all: courage is contagious. One act of defiance can shatter the chains of years, and one voice refusing to be silent can illuminate even the darkest corners of a family. And in that moment, I whispered to myself, knowing Robert would never hear it, "We survived the worst, but the scars remain, and they will remind us, always, that silence is never safety."